So we're going to start with Ruth. And Ruth started her career with the British Council. And she was also curator at the Photographers Gallery in London. She worked at the Mead Gallery at the Warwick Art Centre. And if we roll on to today, she currently works for Oxford Hospitals Charity. And she was the founder of ArtLink. And what impresses me with Ruth and how she works is that she has this ability to be able to find and commission artists, and often it's new artists that perhaps haven't been well known yet, and to find the right place for that art at the right time with the right audience. And so, for example, here is a painting called Kids by Michael Craig Martin, and it's in the John Radcliffe Hospital in the West Wing atrium. And isn't this just wonderful? And this was arranged and organized by Ruth. So Ruth, it's what I've really valued is understanding more about you as a curator. I will say I had always imagined that curators were more museum based, and you've helped me to see that not at all. So really you've opened my eyes, certainly, and we look forward to hearing how you are going to open our eyes this evening. So for each of the artists, I will be asking two questions. Looking back, how have you responded to COVID? And then looking ahead, how or what will you carry forward? And so, Ruth, I'm going to stop sharing at this point. And the question, as you know, Ruth, that I'm asking is, looking back, how have you as a curator responded to COVID?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's lovely also to see lots of familiar faces on the screen. Actually, if we go straight, I think, to the first slide, everything changed a year ago, or a year and a bit ago. Most of my focus of my work is on creating environmental improvement projects for wards and departments. And we have a very lively exhibition programme as well. And one of the projects that we were right in the middle of was a programme of artwork for our new emergency building. And what happened in March 2020 was that suddenly I was unable to go into the hospital. So all the projects that we were in the middle of had to be paused, including a lovely project with Miranda, which no doubt she will talk about later. If you move to the second slide, we did eventually manage to get the artwork installed, but that was the first major change to my work. The second thing that changed was that actually patient need and staff need changed. So we were in a situation where staff were under enormous pressures and needed support for their own well-being. And patients were coming into hospital with increased anxiety, and for most of the year had no visitors or a visitor for an hour a day. So they were bored, they were anxious, and they were stressed. So if we move on to the next slide, we had to completely rethink how we were going to support patients and staff during this time. And one of the first things that we looked at was print in terms of patient need. And we produced a number of activity booklets. So on the left here, we did a comic with the Phoenix comic, who I don't know whether any of you know, but they're an absolutely fantastic comic in Oxford. And we produced a comic book for children, which had a specially commissioned comic strip of preparing children for coming into hospital for an operation. We also worked with the Creative Dementia Arts Network, and we produced material for older patients. And through the generosity of wonderful artists who we'd worked with, we collated a lot of wonderful material for a colouring and puzzle book. And we put these into patient bags with cards and crayons and other little bits and pieces, so that these could be distributed to patients. And if we move on to the next slide, we also looked at how we would take some of the work that we do online. We had quite a lively music program, and we put this onto iPads. And one of the things that we found was that we could then the musician could communicate directly with patients. We were particularly focused on patients who were older, and for older patients, the whole experience of COVID, particularly those with dementia, was incredibly confusing. And for a patient to see a face, a smiling face on an iPad, and for that musician then to play them a request, we've had lovely responses too. And if we go to the next slide, we were also really conscious of how do we support staff. So I started off by putting quite a lot of material online to support staff wellbeing. We have a culture club where I send weekly emails to staff. We did a whole series of postcards, take time to relax, with little bits of poetry or a little quiz, or an origami, how to make an origami heart. And then we started doing online work with staff teams to help staff teams just stop for 10 minutes a day and fold an origami flower. And we found that there were particular teams who really responded to this. We worked with a fantastic artist, Lizzie Burns, who created absolutely beautiful pieces and has a real skill at working online. And she does an online fold every week with origami. And we found that staff really responded to this. It was a way of absolutely switching off. And I think my favourite bit of feedback from staff was one member of staff saying, this is our vaccine for wellbeing, that creativity. And they shared that with patients as well. We also put together an exhibition of paintings and artwork created of staff and by staff. I haven't in these slides included the wonderful portraits for NHS heroes, because I know Tom, who started that fantastic project, we'll talk about them later, but we included a number of portraits of Oxford staff within that. We also had wonderful work by local artists who created pieces, and one of our housekeeping staff in the intensive care unit who created the beautiful wings image that you saw. So in a nutshell, Diane, that's how we responded. It's been quite a year.
Ruth, that sounds incredible about how you made that shift to responding to the patients and the staff needs. Gosh, it really it gives me goosebumps, really. So Ruth, as you know, the next question that we all are curious to know, and actually it's perhaps a burning question for all of us, isn't it, of what or how, when you're looking ahead, how are you going to carry this forward? And so I'm curious in terms of the balance of the different stuff that you've done. So do tell us, Ruth, what are you going to take forward?
Well, I think it's changed our way of working. I think we will continue to do more in print form. We will continue to look at online activity where it works and have a kind of dual approach. And one of the things that we're particularly focused on in next year onwards is staff wellbeing. Staff are absolutely wrung out at the moment. They've just been working full throttle. They're exhausted. We're really, really conscious of how we can support them. One of the things that's happened to me over this period is that I've become part of, I was already part of a steering group for a national network of hospital arts managers, but we've supported each other. We've had weekly meetings and we've shared the activities that we have been developing. And actually one of the pieces I showed of print, we've produced a kind of national boredom buster newspaper that goes out to all hospitals that's been developed in Western Bristol. But we've given each other a huge amount of support, and we've been looking at what we can do in terms of the arts to support staff ongoing. And so we are at the R&D stage of working to develop a national project that will say a thank you to staff. It's across 22 trusts, and that will be a project that is, on the one hand, performative. There'll be something that performance-based or temporary based that is socially engaged and is created from listening to staff voices that will happen all across 22 trusts on one day. We don't have that date as yet. And we're also helping those 22 trusts profile what they're doing in terms of commemorative pieces. And if we go to the next slide, one of the things we've been doing is really listening to staff experience. And we've recognised the value of teamwork over this last year. So we've been working with the most fantastic poet called Beth Calverley, who's been doing online workshops with teams of staff, and they have she co-writes poetry. So the poetry she creates is from staff words. And then moving on to the next slide, we've also been thinking about commemoration. We're in a particular moment of history. So we are looking at how we commemorate that moment of history, how we commemorate the lives that have been lost. This is the beginning of a project that we hope that we'll get funding for with the wonderful Harriet Riddell, who is an Artweeks artist. And she's been going into the vaccination hubs across the trust and stitching sketches of the whole process. For the vaccination program in the hospitals has been one of the biggest programs in terms of bringing together lots of different teams of staff. All the work that I do is funded by Oxford Hospitals Charity, and so we have to raise money for everything. It's not NHS funded, and we go out to trusts and other grant giving bodies and individual supporters. So we are hoping that we can find some funding for this project. But that is where we're at. We're particularly focused on staff wellbeing going forward.